Hey everybody, welcome to the ProgCast. I'm Gregg Bendian, and as you know, we always try to bring you different kinds of progressive music, all the different forms, acoustic, electric, tonal, atonal, and today's no exception in, in that we have someone who's no stranger to the progressive music community. You know him as a touch guitar player, war guitar, Chapman stick, bass. He's also a singer and a composer. I'm very happy to welcome him to the ProgCast. Hello, Trey Gunn. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. I like the tonal to the atonal.
It's happening.
It is happening. Hey, so I'm going to butt in first because I have this cloudy recollection that we shared the stage.
We did.
Now, my memory is very cloudy. I kind of let Pat Mastelotto take all the tour memories, but was it in Nashville?
It was in Nashville.
Was it with Crimson?
It was Construction of Light,
Was it 12th and Porter?
12th and Porter.
Did you just do one night with us, or did you do more than one?
We did 5 or 6 shows with you that week.
At 12th and Porter, or?
Yeah, it was a warm up for you guys after having recorded Construction of Light,
Okay.
and you were starting these shows, and all this stuff was new stuff, and everybody was playing through laptops, and laptops were crashing. And Richard Leo Johnson and I, ironically enough, were
You were just a duo, right?
playing duo
Yeah.
acoustic guitar.
Oh, sorry.
Wow, that's celebrating the duo of Richard Leo Johnson, Gregg Bendian. Yeah, we were acoustic, and this was also the nascent electronic drum kit thing that Pat was beginning
Oh,
his
yes.
journey with. So Construction of Light 2000, and it was great because Richard and I would open the shows. Well, sometimes Patricia Fripp would come out and introduce us. She was there doing
That's a
merch,
treat.
and
Yeah.
it was wonderful. Her energy was so great, and we felt very welcome because the Crimson audience was completely silent, listening to every note we played. Utter respect, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
You guys were nice to us. Well, 3 of the
Some of
4
us.
of you guys were nice to us.
Some of us ignored you, and some of us were nice to you. We can leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. But it was an amazing experience, and I thank you for remembering that. For it
Yeah.
was very exciting for me because I've been a lifelong Crimson head, and go back to the Bruford days even before that. So it's a pleasure for me to talk to you about that because I know you came through a whole series of situations involving Crimson Land and then eventually in the band. But I'm kind of interested in the fact that you studied composition seriously. And I would
Yeah.
love to talk a little bit about that. And you were at University of Oregon for that?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it. I was going to say it's a rather short story, but who knows what you'll get out of me. How did I end up there? I went to the University of Oregon and I studied composition. Was, I had played classical music as a kid and like like from 6 or 7, and played Bach and Bartok or whatever you did back then. And this was the
On
70s on piano. Yeah. And, transitioned to bass and acoustic guitar. And pretty much I was like in kind of punk rock new wave bands in the late 70s. And it was counter to the culture to study music. I'm going to go my own way and I'm not going to learn. I'm talking about the kind of punk culture,
I remember it
punk
well.
influence, and sometimes that was cool. Sometimes that would produce unusual things. Sometimes it wasn't unusual. I guess, you could kind of say Talking Heads Devo with the cool way. You know, the Ramones are cool, but you knew what you were going to get, and that's what you got. And so, or, you know, I was a big Iggy Pop fan and all these different punk things, but I still felt like if I was going to be a professional, whatever that meant at the time and whatever it means now, but basically on track to get really good at something, then I should learn about the materials. Even though it was counter to everyone I knew and all the people that I admired, not all of them, you know, there was McLaughlin and there was that scene as well. But so I thought, you know, if I was a writer, I would want to learn how a sentence is structured. It just makes sense, even if you're going to like be a deviant. So that's how I kind of ended up at the University of Oregon. I wanted to learn more stuff and get exposed to more things. You know, there was barely even world music was legit then. And I wanted to go to the West Coast. I was living in Texas, so I was looking in California and Oregon, and I wanted to learn about electronic music as well. And I went and looked at, the story's getting longer than it should, but I went and looked at a couple of schools in California. I went to the University of Santa Cruz, which I ended up meeting some guys who were there at that time who did go, and they had a world music program and they had an electronic music studio, but it was like 3 years to even get access to the music studio. And they weren't very nice to me. And I drove through LA and I visited, I don't know if it was just GIT or if it already expanded to MIT. And I kind of was horrified, terrified, and curious. I went to the Friday afternoon kind of open jam performance thing. And I thought, my God, they're just cranking out like 30 awesome Jeff Beck clones. Steve Lukather clones like every 3 months. I'm never going to be that good, and I don't want to do that. And why would you? It just didn't make sense. So anyway, I ended up going to Oregon. Was my last place. I didn't want to end up in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to be in like vibrant culture, and but the electronic music studio was sitting there empty. And I thought, well, I'll go here for a year and then I'll go back down to California. But I just fell in love with Oregon, and there was quite a punk rock scene there. And because there were like no gigs between San Francisco and Portland except for Eugene, we got Black Flag, Circle Jerks, X. We got all the LA punk bands coming through, and so I just kind of, that's how I got there. That's not even getting to your question, but that's how I got there. And so I ended up staying there. You know, I knew that I didn't want to spend my energies learning academic level performance. So like I could play the piano. Jazz guitar was almost okay. Like it was kind of legit. You could get a few credits over here, but you know, and I didn't, as much as I love the piano, I wasn't gonna pretend that I was serious. And so that's when I kind of went over to composition, because I didn't, I could learn about lots of different music and different practices, and spend my time playing in punk rock bands at the same time. But maybe you have a more specific question.
But just that is interesting, because certainly around the same time period in New York, I was going through the situation of trying to decide to be in a rock band. Did I want to be a composer? I was studying with classical guys for percussion and for composition, because I found it interesting. And I also thought, well, Mahavishnu guys, they learn classical, jazz, and Indian. So you got to know a lot of stuff. At the same time, you know, the progressive music was being overtaken by punk rock and new wave, etc. There was this avant-garde movement coming up where I was playing with people like Derek Bailey and John Zorn and Bill Frisell, Tim Byrne, those guys. And so it's interesting to me
Was
because
the world, were those worlds segregated back then, or were they kind of?
yes. So, in other
Yeah,
words,
yeah,
you'd rarely see the people at Group for Contemporary Music listening to Milton Babbitt as you
right,
would at Roulette listening to, you know, David Moss.
right.
So I was always awkwardly poised between these two worlds because I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if these two worlds collided?
Right,
And if there
right,
was serious pitch discovery and development and connections between sections, even if you are improvising. That had been an interest of mine from really from high school. Like how do you do that if you want to do so? Then you became aware of the open aspects kind of composers like Stockhausen and Henze and guys that had movable parts in their pieces, performer involvement. And I found like there was sort of a join there between, especially since guys like Hugh Davies, who were playing with Derek Bailey and the Music Improvisation Company,
mm, mm.
were working with Stockhausen at the same time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's
Makes
kind of
sense.
you see, I mean, Barry Guy working Academy of Ancient Music, but he's playing in Evan Parker's trio and elsewhere. So
Right, right.
those guys are always interesting to me, which is sort of why you're interesting to me because I know, particularly having watched some of those sound checks that Crimson did in 2000, when you were putting together, kind of updating for live performance, those pieces like Fractured and Frying Pan and Construction of Light, and I saw that it was a group composition process. Am I wrong?
Mm. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, um, the most what's the word for it? Kind of using the word songwriter with Crimson doesn't make any sense. Although
No.
Adrian certainly is a songwriter, but the most kind of I'm the composer or dictatorialness that you would get would be, Robert might have figured out what he's doing in
Mhm.
Fractured, but the rest of you guys are on your own.
And I
Find
could
your
tell.
part. Yeah,
I could
find your
tell.
part.
And you had found your part. And you
Yeah,
had thought through your part and you thought through legato things and the
yeah,
dynamics
yeah,
and the sections and I found that so exciting because also I like hearing things develop. I like hearing
right.
something come back the second time different than the first time and the third time.
Yeah,
That's what you were doing.
which
And
was very much the way that particular the four piece was. The six piece wasn't quite as much as of this kind of development because there's so much sound and you had to blending was kind of a higher priority. But with the four piece, I mean, our manager who now runs Discipline with Robert, David Singleton, used to call us the backwards improvising band. That the guitar players had fixed parts, but every 2 weeks, Pat and I would have like kind of we had mutated into another part, and there was freedom to do that, and I love that. But you're right about the group thing, and what's fascinating about that approach is everybody has to kind of personally chew on their part and make it not only feel good with the band, but feel like something that you feel good about playing. And if somebody really doesn't feel good about playing it, eventually that we wouldn't even have to have a vote or anything. Eventually, that piece would slide off to the side. And but of course, the downside is it takes a lot of time.
yeah.
I don't think any project I've done since that four-piece Crimson had that amount of time to develop ideas as a group. It was more, let's just take an improvisation strategy, or let somebody write music beforehand and we have a few days to work it up. But we spent months and months on these tunes. And sometimes Robert and I would spend years with a little two-bar phrase
Mhm.
playing around with it to see where it would grow. And it doesn't grow anywhere for, until 7 years later, something happens. So that now I realize, I mean, I just thought it was the work at the time, but it's a kind of luxury.
That is very interesting. Yeah. How often does a group get to have time to spend, to cogitate and
Yeah.
connect
And
and
we didn't live together. I kind of, for me, the kind of ideal, maybe this is even a little old fashioned at the time now, but for me, that kind of ideal group that gets to kind of fester together and merge together is Tool. They all live in the same town. They rehearse. Another one is Kronos Quartet. They rehearse 5 days a week for the last 30 years. I mean, how do you get good? That's how you do it. Crimson is a little bit more of a military operation. We would go in, have 2 weeks, intense work, and then everybody would go home and recuperate. And then we'd kind of do that. And eventually touring was like that as well. But yeah, so it's a luxury to be able to develop ideas with other people like that.
yeah. And I remember you or Pat gave me the promo copy of the pre-release Construction of Light. And I went back to my hotel and I listened to it and I noticed that you were changing things already. I noticed that you, like Pat and you, had really changed what you do on Fractured. And I liked it, and it was an upgrade. It was clearly an upgrade. So I was like,
Good.
yeah, they're really. I saw you working on it, and it was so much fun for me. And everybody sounded so great, and everything was really clear. Except maybe Pat's drums, they
Yeah.
were suffering. I spoke to him a lot about it at that time. He was kind of like crying on my shoulder
Yeah.
about it. Every day was a different sound check mix, and he was really struggling with that. But he persevered,
He
and
persevered, and now he has a hybrid kit. And actually, he's a little bit excited about the new DW kit, which we may actually have out on the tour. I don't know, but we may have it out on the tour in this project we have together called TU-NER in May. I don't. Do you know about the kit already, or the
I
electronic?
do. I'm a DW guy for 28 years. Yeah,
Have you played it? Have you played it yet?
I have not. I'm very curious.
Yeah, yeah. For me, it's the volume. I just can't. Pat is so loud, and we're so loud on stage, and I just don't like the volume anymore. My ears are don't like it.
Well, I remember that was kind of the impetus for Pat playing electric for Robert's sake, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they kind of worked it out. The just a final thing on the construction of light. That's the only studio studio made Crimson record in that we never played any of the material live before it got recorded. So
Right.
the studio process is not a great process with Robert. He doesn't really like the sculpting in the studio. He likes to be on fire and do one or two takes and be done. And that works when you've played the material live and you kind of sorted stuff out. Like with the Thrack record, with the double trio, we had played the stuff live so much that when we went into the studio, we were done in a week with the whole record. There weren't even any. I hardly did any overdubs. It was all sorted. But with Construction of Light, it was closer to that Peter Gabriel world, a little bit closer. Like you do a take and realize, oh shit, the arrangement isn't right. Whereas that never happened with the other Crimson projects. You sorted that out on stage and then you went to record. So that's probably why even once the record was done, we were still tweaking it. You
Yeah.
know?
But I think that's so cool because it's alive, and also,
Yeah.
it's plastic, and you shape it, and I think that gives the music a nice extra layer of vitality. I don't want to get too geeky with you, but it's going to happen. So I might as well just ask, what was the discussion around that time in the band about pitch choices? Now I know that sounds like maybe
It's an
too
awesome
vague.
question. Keep
Yeah,
keep asking. Go a little further so I can get.
yeah, and I mean that clearly certain artificial modes are being explored. Clearly certain groupings of notes are being explored. Clearly you're keeping track of how many times you've used D sharp, and then you're thinking now maybe it's D natural. And I'm really curious about that because it's a little bit of a deeper insight, if you could please tell us about that, because one of the things I've always enjoyed about Crimson from the beginning is the dissonant part. So why
I
did you?
feel like there's two forks in that question. Let's take the simpler. Well, I don't know if it's a simpler one, but when you say D or D sharp, that makes me think of things like in the Power to Believe record. There's Happy to Be Happy, and there's this. It's a very Fripp thing where you have a. I don't know if you know the tune Happy to Be Happy very well, but there's a riff in it, and if you just kind of defocus and step back from it, it's a rock riff. But there's like maybe, well, there's a lot of ways to how there's like ways to throw off the traditional balance, right? Like you could do 3 phrases instead of 4, or 5 phrases doesn't always work, but let's 3 or 4, or maybe
Yeah.
there's something that I like to do, which we didn't do it in Crimson that much, which is like you just have a little tag that's a little longer here, you know, and but the Crimson way, and maybe it's more of a Robert way, is there's kind of this rock riff and it has a general shape, but every time the notes are a little different. Or, let's say, and getting very geeky, like there's the major third and the minor third and the tritone in the fifth. Well, one time it may be minor major third, the next time it's major tritone, the next time it's major, that kind of thing. And it's composed in, because we're playing it in unison or octaves or whatever, or fifths, but usually not even fifths. And that's one thing that, we'd play around with it. And then Robert, as I remember, like I'm thinking of this tune in particular, would kind of codify that, we're going to do this one and then this one and that one, and then this one again. And it wasn't so crazy, like every time that section came, it would be a different version of that. But it would be, it kind of makes this shape that's, you could say it's out of balance, or it just has you get kind of a double effect. You get the effect of it being kind of a little more energized because the form doesn't get flat. And like if you hear the same riff 4 times, by the third one, you kind of check out a little bit, and you check out to defocus. But if it's changing in little ways, you not only either don't check out or you really lean in, right? And so there's that aspect, and the other aspect, and this is I'm kind of speaking on behalf of Robert, which is a stupid, silly thing to do, but he wasn't.
I'll allow it.
He wasn't secretive about it. He liked to write stuff into the music that would throw you off if you weren't really paying attention. And he talked about that with Fracture a lot, that it's like impossible to play unless you're just like, it's like you're snowboarding and there's like trees popping up, and then there's like a werewolf chasing you, and you just got to be like ready for every little twist and turn, and that's oftentimes composed into those things.
Oh, clearly since Schizoid Man.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the thing is that I find so fascinating is that it's one of the major preoccupations, I think, of modern art at large, which is subverting expectation
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and also giving it an organic quality. You talk about 3s and 5s. I'm there all day.
yeah, yeah,
Why 4 times? No,
yeah,
3
yeah,
times might be more exciting. 5 times might be more or less exciting.
yeah.
So this sort of idea of form, when I hear it in a band like Crimson, I'm very attracted to it. I find it very fascinating. And so I'm always wondering. And also, Robert has always been a very intervallic guy. So I
Yeah,
sort of see these
yeah,
old pieces like Fracture as kind of these intervallic studies and etudes, but really developmental.
Yeah, yeah. So then that's kind of that one fork for me, which is uh, kind of a traditional form, but you're making a little naughty knot work around it. And then the other side you're kind of leaning towards is I mean, the symmetrical scale almost defines a huge catalog of Crimson. Pick your era, and it's there.
It's there.
Not the discipline era so much, but we worked with it a lot, and I worked with it a lot with Robert leading up to Crimson and through it, and finding riffs that had that, which the symmetrical scale has it has this organic familiarness that you can access, and then it has these weird unbalances in it. And so, it's kind of weird to say, well, this is how Robert would do the symmetrical scale, because it's not so. I don't think it's like thought out systematically as much as, for whatever reason, he liked well, fracture is a great example. It's basically two or three parts,
Mhm.
not a counterpoint, but this kind of jumping around thing.
Three
And the
ideas.
high lines are doing something, and so we kind of ran with that for a certain part of the material. Construction of light is a great example. It's that there may not be a note out of the symmetrical scale in most of the sections, but it's like anything. It's kind of how much you've digested it that you can do with it. You can't just run up and down it.
Right.
You can't just I mean, you totally know what I mean, but like say even a particular rhythm, you can learn a rhythm, and you can use it, but if you really digest it and say, oh, what if I move this note over a 16th note? What if I move it this way? And you go in there and just chew on every little bit of it, you've got it. It's just a richer thing when you work with it. And symmetrical scales like that, the more you work with it, any scales like that, but that one in particular, we would chew on it a lot and play around with a lot of different things. And
Yeah, octave displacement. I mean, there's so many
yeah,
different ways
yeah,
of
yeah.
making it work.
Which to be super geeky is, it's kind of embedded with Robert's kind of cross picking,
Hmm.
and then on my instrument, because I'm tuned in fifths and have this wide range, and I use both hands, it's relatively easy to just displace anything anywhere. Of course, you have to be tasteful,
Hmm.
and you have to decide, if I'm a bass player, do I really want to? Well, maybe I do. Maybe I don't. you know, and
Well, I
all of
also thought of you, sorry to interrupt, but I also thought of you as a tenor voice, a cello voice in that band.
Yeah, yeah. Which is what I kind of had to do with the double trio with Tony Levin in the band, a tenor baritone, commentary voice. Yeah. So I tried to play that, and yeah, yeah. And what I was just going to add was that all this whole conversation makes us have to say double kudos to Adrian, because Adrian played with Paul Simon and Bowie and with this stuff with us. It's just one aspect of Adrian that he merged in with this stuff and blended and played it like a demon.
I don't mind taking a moment to say
And in the four, and in the standard tuning, while Robert and I are tuned in fifths. So
again,
his fingerings are ridiculous, what he had to do.
but I remember very vividly that there was some sort of BS going on with fans complaining about Adrian, I don't in some way lyrically or something, and he was feeling kind of down that week. And I just went up to him and I said, Adrian, they need three guys to replace you, one to play the parts, one to rip the solos, and one to sing. So you're amazing. And he was like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
thank you. But it was just so funny to me, like spoiled brats. Like, you got Adrian Belew in this band and you don't realize what you got there. I mean, he just blows
yeah,
me away every time.
yeah, yeah. Well, and also, we were suffering to a degree of the beginning of internet trolling
That
monologuing,
was, yeah.
which was, the first tour we did with a Thrack tour was when the internet really exploded and we could read individual comments after every show the next day on the bus. Now nobody thinks twice about that, but at the time you never saw individual, you never heard an individual except for maybe after the show. And most people won't come up and tell you what they don't like. You saw reviews, but this was like holy moly. And Adrian was so sensitive to that I can't remember if we forbade him from looking at it or he decided he just can't look at it.
Yeah. But I was fascinated by how he made it look easy and you're
Yeah,
telling me how difficult it is.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
he's just,
yeah.
beyond.
Yeah, if you just look at his hands compared to Robert's hands on a couple of the tunes, you'll say like, "Oh my gosh, Robert's got it's massively efficient,
Hmm.
his thing, and Adrian's having to do this and that, over here." And sometimes he would change one of his middle strings for a tune, you know. Yeah, amazing, amazing guy.
And I always like the kind of this through line, and maybe you can refute or acknowledge this, but this through line through Crimson of chaos and order. And that if you're looking at Lark's Tongues, you're looking at Bruford over here, but you got Jamie Muir over here, chaos. You look
Hmm.
at the group before that with Keith Tippett on
Hmm.
piano. And then when Adrian's in the band and he's going to unleash holy hell.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
is that something that was talked about, or is that just something that was part of the ethos of the band?
My first instinct when you said that was that this is Robert picking the right people for the job, and not really saying anything.
Oh, I see.
I mean, Jamie Muir is going to do Jamie Muir,
Right.
and um, I think that's the successful combination sets the gong going. It's like the first note of the night sets the tone. You get the right guys in the room, and that's going to set the thing. And Robert's I don't like to use the word genius, but he's really good about picking the right people at the right moment. You know,
Oh, yeah.
the right moment in time, the right people. And I with like when we get down to the four piece, to me it feels like the that balance that you're talking about. It turned into the improvs versus the tight songs. Is that balance? And sometimes it would even be within the same song, but sometimes it would be more open moments.
But this is why we buy the box sets because they have the improv with a silly name and then they have the tune, but it's just the intro improv to the tune
Yeah,
on the Starless and Bible Black Band and this kind of stuff. So and
yeah,
I think it's been there from the beginning even really.
yeah, yeah.
And so, I'm fascinated by that because it really is a major concern of modern creativity, I think.
Mm,
Chaos and,
mm,
and order. How do we handle them? What are we
mm,
saying about them?
mm-hmm,
Is one
mm-hmm,
winning out over the other? Is there a balance?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. For me, just personally, in my work, I like them both,
Yeah.
and I like. I mean, I've done well. We did with the Crimson Fractals. We did complete improv shows,
Mhm.
and I love those. But it's a heavy meal to eat. it's a heavy meal to eat, and total free improv. It only works half the time. The
That's
other half,
true.
it does not work. And 10% is 15 on a good night is complete shit, and then 10% might be amazing. So you kind of hopefully the audience goes into that with you, knowing that. But I like the combination, and I like it when the transition is uncertain, when you're slowly pulling apart, or you've got chaos mixed with some form under it, or that's just me.
Were you ever interested in XTC, the
Oh
band?
yeah, I love those guys from Drums and Wires, yeah. But English Settlement, and yeah, yeah. In fact, the I remember buying maybe the first record was Black Sea. I went in the record store, I bought Black Sea, Boy, and Peter Gabriel's third record, and that was pretty much, I was fried. My brain was fried after that.
Covered a lot of ground with those three.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I found it fascinating. I have recollection of an article in Musician magazine back in the day about Bill Bruford having a cassette of Drums and Wires in his car.
Wow, that's really hard for me to imagine.
Well, it's interesting because this is right on the heels of Discipline. And Robert had just come from Barry Andrews, the
Oh yeah, of
keyboardist from
course.
XTC in the League of Gentlemen. And now he's got Adrian and Tony, so it's kind of his New York band.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Um, but and I found that the two guitar and bass and drum writing is the meat and potatoes of both bands.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And
and
how does one
pretty
come up with that?
pretty highly evolved on English Settlement. Super highly evolved. Yeah, yeah,
Acoustic and electric together.
yeah, and Andy and Dave Gregory.
Hmm.
Super interlocking stuff. You could arguably say more fluid than Crimson
Hmm.
in terms of flowing through the harmony, and because Andy really wrote the harmony with the melody, or however he does what he does.
Hmm.
It's the harmony is a different kind of play than how the Discipline era Crimson did harmony. But yeah, those two records are great.
Yeah, and contemporaneous because I think 82 is English Settlement, Discipline is a 82.
Might be 80, might be 81.
What?
Discipline.
Discipline's 82.
Is it really?
I think so, yeah. They played
Oh
at my
shit.
college
Okay.
in the gym at Rutgers, and it was life changing. But yeah, I remember because it was, I looked it up and I was surprised it was 82 because it does seem earlier because League of Gentlemen is right before that.
Right, right.
Boy, we're drifting here, but let me ask you about a couple of other things. The first time I heard you was in the context of the Sylvian Fripp band.
Mm. Hmm.
And I really love that band. And I love
Yeah, me
those
too.
recordings. And Damage for me could be one of the greatest breakup songs of all time. And,
Yeah.
Sylvian heavy. So what was it like in that situation? Because it's you and Pat again.
Not initially. Initially, it was just Robert and David and I.
Was it?
Yeah, we met. We met at David's apartment in London for like a week to just work together, or maybe it was only 3 days. Um, David wanted to do something with Robert, and Robert said, "Well, can I bring Trey?" And he's like, "Sure." So we put together a show, and we played two little tours, one in Japan and one in Italy, as a three-piece with no drums. And that was something. I mean, I had been a fan of David's, but working with him and then working at Robert at that level was just a great vibe. And the shows There's recordings of the shows. They don't quite do it justice as I experienced, but it was so fascinating because we had this kind of lush, soaring ambient landscapes, and we would just open the show for 20 minutes of that, and then David would start to sing. So you're already enveloped in this thing, and then his voice comes in, and so that was pretty cool. We did a couple of, I don't know, 10 or 15 shows, I can't remember. And then when it came time to record, then we went into the studio and ended up recording with Jerry Marotta, but Pat joined for the tour.
Oh, that's right. It's Murata.
Yeah, so we recorded it in Dreamland, which is now Jerry's studio, but it wasn't at the time. And that was a great experience because I really love the way David works in the studio, and he gave me a lot of freedom and a lot of participation, and I got to kind of see how he builds up things and tears things down.
Tell me a little bit about that.
We were on. We weren't in a Pro Tools situation yet. We were on. I think it was Sony Digital 24 tracks. So it was tape. Although it was digital, I think I don't remember. Anyway, it was it was an analog style recording session, so we didn't do any editing, but what we would do is, what was funny was we had written these songs without drums, and then when we went in to play them, and they were very short, so we would play a tune, Firepower or 20th Century Dreaming, and the song was done after 3 minutes, but we weren't. So Jerry would just come back in, and we ended up doing these long codas, and that's kind of how the First Day album was realized. We had these tight little songs that David would sing, and then we'd do these extended codas, and so when we would make the codas, we would play it down live, and we never replaced any of the basic tracks as far as I remember. I remember one time I wanted to redo my bass part, and Robert and David were like, "It sounds great. What, are you crazy?" I was like, "Let me have a chance." And I went in and did it, and I walked in the studio. I thought I'd done better, and they were like, "No, first one's better. That's it." So, but then David would layer these codas with, he would do like 4 shortwave radio tracks, or like guitar things, or I would do some swells and Robert would do a solo, and then he would go in and erase 95% of it. So you just end up with a little thing here, a little thing there.
So he's arranging in the mixing process.
It's before the mixing. It's really
Editing?
the editing is just literally putting the erase button on. Literally, like we would go through. He would do a 6-minute track diddling with the shortwave radio, and then they would go back through and erase 95% of it. And you end up with this kind of moving middle ground sounds, that come and go, and he would do that all over the place. And so, and even sometimes not with Robert solos. Sometimes it would be the whole way through, but sometimes it would. He would do like 3 solos, and then David would just keep like 4 phrases. And because you can't move things in time. I mean, you could, but we didn't. It was more like you get the performance liveness of the presence, but you just pick the best parts and you kind of make a weaving of it. So it was fascinating.
Yeah, he's a very interesting artist. I never really knew what his home base was in terms of the music, and I mean, were you a fan of his band Japan?
I wasn't. I didn't even know about them
You didn't know about them.
until we got together, and Robert was like, "You've got to do a Japan song." When we go, like say, when we go to Japan, we're playing as a trio, and David's kind of reluctant. He's a lot like Robert was, which is the past, and it's time to move forward. But he was reluctant, and then he did but he did decide to do acoustic version of the Japan tune Ghosts, and I had never heard it. So I listened to him play it live like for 9 nights, and then I went and listened to the original. I was like, oh my God, that is an incredible piece of music. And then
It's
if you go back one record and listen to what the band was like, it doesn't even make sense how it happened.
and it was a hit single.
And it was a hit single. Yeah. I mean, that's probably the most abstract hit single ever. Maybe Oh
Nominee.
Superman, but it's not as abstract, but it's
I'm sorry?
conceptually. Maybe Oh Superman.
Oh yeah.
In terms of it's not what you're expecting at all,
Oh.
but Ghost is literally abstracted. Yeah. Yeah.
And amazing that there at that time there was an audience that could hear that and go, yeah, more of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So did how did that all end up then with the Sylvian Fripp thing? That didn't he ask Robert ask David to be in King Crimson?
I never heard that.
Hmm.
I know that the Crimson was the ugly head was rearing itself, prior to that. But it wouldn't surprise me if he did, but I wasn't party to that conversation. And I think David's no dummy. I'm sure he said no right away. He wouldn't I think he wouldn't want that on him. He wouldn't want to work under that. Not that.
The type of artist he is wouldn't want that. Yeah.
Yeah, David is a real artist, and unlike most of us, he
Hmm.
really is. He's most of us are players. We're happy to play and play and play, and Robert's happy to release everything on record and perform and play. And me, I am as well. Even as much as I like to sculpt, I'm really kind of a player. David's like everything he puts out. It feels like he's aware of his whole body of work at the same time. And if something doesn't fit that whole body of work, I think it just either doesn't interest him, he doesn't have the energy for it, or it's just not his way of working, you know. So the history of Crimson, yeah,
Hmm.
doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah, but then you do end up. What's next? Is it the sextet after that?
Yeah, right into it. I mean, we finished the tour and went like 3 months later into well, I don't even know if we had a writing period. I think we had a writing 5 days, and then we recorded the EP.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you? I mean, it's so funny now that they had done the three drummer thing, but how do you deal with two drummers, two bass players, and two guitarists?
Very carefully. I think we all had a lot of ideas going into it once we knew this was the situation. But it wasn't until you got in the room together that you kind of figure out what it was a little bit of a slow process, I think, figuring out what works. And I know Bill was very concerned, and he was often he was kind of bouncing ideas off me and asking, what if we do this, or in terms of the drummers. I think they figured out some awesome stuff. Tony and I took a while to figure out different ways of doing things, and we tried different things, and some of them worked and some of them didn't work. But weirdly, it seemed like it was easier for the drummers to interlock sonically than it was for actually two bass instruments. Especially, well, I mean, Tony has a huge bottom end. I think my bottom end is probably even bigger than Tony's. So we either took turns, or often I would go up into the baritone register, and I think we the original idea was kind of these two. It was a double trio with Pat and Robert and I on one side, and Adrian and Bill and Tony on the other side, whatever that meant. But it's not like that once you get on stage. We did do two versions of the tune Vroom, two mixes. One where we literally split the rhythm sections left and right and then another where it merged. Really, at the end of the day, really it was a six-piece crazy electronic orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because you have to understand the register of the thing, the registration of the whole thing,
yeah,
and then density and velocity, busyness, all of these kinds of things come into play. And I guess I just wonder, why was this aggregation formed?
I'm afraid you're going to have to ask Robert about that.
Yeah, huh?
I mean, there's what was funny about Bill was that when we got together, Bill said he's the drummer who's done double drumming more than anybody. Because also Genesis
Yeah.
and
And
you
Jamie.
know, and with Jamie, and so yeah, Robert had the vision, and it worked.
I mean, it's funny because I do think of two other bands that had two bass players, and I don't know, maybe you know more than me, but there was Ornette Coleman's Prime Time had two bass players.
Electric and upright, right?
No, he would do two electrics.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, it was like Al McDowell and Jamaluddin, both
Hmm.
electric. And then Zappa had two bass players
Mm, mm.
around 75, I think 76. And, because and then of course Cecil Taylor had two different kinds. One would be pizzicato, one's arco. So I find that very interesting because there's a lot that can happen down there.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
nothing else down there. You can have some things going on down there.
yeah, yeah. And also admittedly, it's different going into a large PA or with amps where you get the stereo separation. And then, kudos to David Bottrell for mixing those double drums and getting the phase right on everything so that they all fit together. And but I do feel like low frequency bass is more of an issue
Hmm.
than even the drums.
Yeah.
Like you can fiddle with the kick drums, but when Tony's down there playing a low B or an E, that's what the band is sitting on top of.
Mhm.
You can't just throw another note down there with a different sound. It's not good acoustics.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's also, I feel like we've come into a new age now of low end. And that
Mm,
didn't maybe perhaps exist at that time. Is that fair?
yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah, with new systems and
Hmm.
massive processing and really fine tune EQing.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I saw Meshuggah recently live, and the low
And the
end
low
was
tune guitars. Yeah,
so together, so clear, so satisfying.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I bet their production rehearsals are super tweaked. I bet they super tweaked their EQ, to fit. And it's not that hard. It's just you have to be the kind of musician that wants to do that. Crimson wasn't that. It's like it's not every man for their own, but kind of nobody oversaw at least live, like how all the sounds fit together. It was more of a chaotic free for all, and the sound man had to deal with it.
And then last week, went to meet Danny Carey and see Tool play at Madison Square Garden. And that was very interesting too, because the low end situation in that group is pretty serious too.
Hmm.
And I was curious, what did you do with Tool? Because I think you've done some stuff with them.
Well, Crimson did like 11 or 12 shows with them.
Yeah.
And then they invited Pat and I to join a couple of shows, maybe 4 or 5 shows as an opening act, and then we played. I think it was Lateralis with them, and that was awesome.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'd never played to 22,000 people before. It's not the same as playing to 4,000 people.
No.
I can see how you could get really addicted to that
Hmm.
if you did that night after night. It's a different level of drug.
Yeah. I did, we did 56,000 people at the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City with Musical Box. And you only see the first 100 people. And then there's just sort of this presence out
Yeah,
there,
it's a
this
presence.
looming presence, and it is a very different energy. Yeah. So I was at Progstock in October and had the pleasure of seeing laid out on the merch table all of these King Crimson score books. And I know that you've been very heavily involved with these, and they're wonderfully beautiful and just so detailed. And I just wanted to ask about that process and maybe the origins of it, because I spoke to Dave Gregory from XDC about doing such a thing with the XDC parts, and no interest. So,
That doesn't surprise me at all.
right.
Probably because he knows he's got to deal with Andy. And Andy, like, probably Andy either couldn't handle it, or if he did, he would have to massage every single note to get it just right. I'm just guessing that.
Well, Andy would have no idea of notation though. So,
Yeah, sure,
so
sure.
this is Dave's, world, and I know
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
you're obviously a read and write music guy. So,
I am, but I didn't do the transcriptions.
okay, so tell me about the
So
process.
I met Gabriel, who did the transcriptions. I think when I was doing a score book, I think he emailed me like that he had done the construction of light or something, and I was like, you must be kidding me. And then he sent me the score, and I was like, wow, okay, well, this is like 3/4 of the way to perfection. But I'm working on a score book of some of my stuff. Could you help me with that? And we worked with that, and which kind of set the groundwork for how to deal with some of the quirks of the music, namely the multiple time signatures.
Mhm.
There wasn't a good way, and there still isn't a good way, and so Gabriel kind of cracked how to notate the multiple time signatures in Sibelius. By hand you can do anything, and I'm old school.
Rebellious, no like.
I've done a lot of by hand, and I don't want to ever do that again.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so we had the idea, but because he had started doing a couple of the tunes, we had the idea of like doing the whole Thrack record, and there were a lot of complications, the time signatures, and when we got into it, like how to notate the accidentals. Are
Sure.
you in a key? Are you? And this is super geeky. Or are you doing
Well,
it?
but that's kind of what I was alluding to when
Oh, great. Let's do it.
I asked you
Let's do,
earlier about pitch. And
yeah,
so, there's a difference between D sharp and E flat,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
And
So,
what's interesting about it was we got into a lot of arguments.
yeah.
Just precursor to that, before we went very far, I was like, we have to get the publishing rights,
Actually.
and the band doesn't own them.
Right. That's
And
actually
so,
what killed the XDC project, by the way. That's
oh,
not the other
yeah.
thing. That was the problem.
Well, there may be a way around that, and maybe I'll talk to them.
Okay.
But anyway, because we figured out how to do it, and
Hmm.
you don't even have to ask the band permission.
Okay.
But you do have to ask who controls the publishing.
Right.
And I remember very distinctly when Robert was putting together the Virgin Records contract for Thrack. And I remember seeing in there that they were going to take, they wanted 50% of music, whatever they called it. It's like a 1920s term. Like they called it music publishing, but it's really score book. And I thought, well, that's a lot. but everybody was like, well, nobody's ever gonna.
Oh, they'd have sheet music rights back in the
Yeah,
day.
yeah,
Yeah.
50%. And of course, no one's ever gonna do like a big note, Crimson thing. Well, of course, now then eventually came down to, I was like, okay, whatever. So eventually, I was the one who had to negotiate. There was no negotiation. Basically, when we did the book, I had to pay a giant fee to Hal Leonard, of which only the band got half the money.
Oh,
And that's just the way it goes.
yeah.
But anyway, I sorted it out. I didn't have to ask. I just had to pay the money. So that once we knew that was possible, and also professional aside, it took 2 years for me to get my share after I wrote the check. But so anyway, the we had to deal with the multiple time signatures, and then we had to deal with the pitching, and if we were going to do key centers, key signatures with accidentals, or if we were going to do it like, I think of it Bartok style, but probably Stravinsky as well, where it's just all accidentals,
All
and
accidentals, yeah.
you just don't deal with. And we did combinations usually, and Gabriel and I would getting these arguments about like, okay, it's the symmetrical scale, but which one and how to notate it, because the notation, it doesn't fall right. And I was always trying to defer to how Robert and I thought of it. Where we thought like this is E, even though we may not be playing any E's at the moment. And because it's E, the flat second is F, and this and that. Or if it's C, the flat second is D flat. But no matter what you did, there was always some note that just didn't, you had to fudge it. And Gabriel we would often fight about it. At the end of the day, I eventually just gave in. It's like, okay, you're the notation guy. You've got more engraving experience, and it doesn't really matter if it's G flat or F sharp.
I guess you end up there, but I know, having been through it a million times, guys complaining like, "Why are you calling that D sharp? That's an E flat there," and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
different people thinking of it from different angles, and
Exactly. And there's no, all I could do was the angle that how Robert and I discuss things, like let's move it to G. Well, okay, that's what we called this. But it's a little bit like, I don't know. It's a little bit like maybe let's say if I could take it to let's say take it to the film world, the director can be trying to make whatever they think they're making, but we're the audience and we're watching it. And if it's working, everybody knows. And so, at the end of the day, we never use notation in Crimson. That's the thing. It was always oral, or Robert and I the only ones who would make notes just to help keep track of things. But it doesn't mean it's the right way to look at the whole thing. But anyway, I think we found a good compromise. And the biggest trick was the multiple time signatures. And Gabriel had to actually crack the Sibelius software in order to do this, because you can't have multiple time signatures. What he'd have to do was make a 211 beat bar, and then artificially draw in the different bar lines. And I think it's probably very laborious, and especially when you got into 3 and 4 time signatures happening at the same time. And then, of course, with the repetitions, you want to be able to reduce the page count,
yes,
because there's you can only go up to certain pages before you
now
kick
you
over
got roadmap problems.
Yeah. And also you want it to be digestible. You don't want to just,
Well, I
so
think performability too, right? I mean, all of these choices, I often think it goes down to, does it look easier or harder to play when you spell it that way? Or,
Right. Yeah.
performability.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how I kind of looked at it eventually. Like, Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think that's practical. I mean, I guess that's all the guys I studied with, that's what they went with. You
yeah.
know, it's going to be all the accidentals and it's going to be multiple time signatures. And just as a sidebar, I don't know if you're a Charles Ives fan, but I work at Yale Oral History and I went into the library there and they have the pencil scores for Charles Ives' Fourth Symphony.
Wow.
And in the margins, you can see him working out the arithmetic issues of having polymetric stuff going on,
Wow. Wow.
multi-metric. And it was so fascinating because that led to a new edition by my friend Jim Sinclair, who, like yourself, is thinking about playability, and how these things can now work with what we know about notation and what looks clear, and how you only need one conductor. You don't need a second conductor necessarily if everybody's still in the same general pulse, but they're in different subdivisions.
Right,
And I
right, right.
think, that kind of clarity. I mean, isn't the goal, Trey, to get this stuff played at the end of the day?
I think so. I guess for me, it's multiple. As I kind of wrote in the introduction of Thrack, doing a scorebook of Crimson is an anomaly. In a way, it doesn't make any sense because the music is alive and it changes, and saying here's a fixed version says to the world this is the version, you know. But that said, it's a badass cool version.
Mhm.
And the other side of it is, I guess a simple way to say it would be like practice craft materials to take on your instrument and explore your instrument in a different way, or explore some of these ideas, which is what we would be doing with Crimson. We would never look to the scorebook to play the parts. Although we did do that recently
Yeah.
when I was playing with Adrian and Tony and Pat at the Crimson Camp. We did a version of Thrack, and there was this question like, how does the line in the beginning go? And there was this, and I thought that, and one of the campers said, "I have the scorebook," so we got it out, and we're like, okay, well, we're going to do it this way. You know, so for me, yeah, playability, but in a way, it's like if let's say if I was going to do, even if I hadn't been in the band, if I wasn't wanted to do a version of one of these tunes, I would still take it as an arrow pointing in a certain direction,
Fair
and I
enough.
wouldn't feel like I had to play the lines exactly. I might want to learn how they are and then decide, oh, maybe I would do a little differently, which is what Crimson did. We changed Larks 2 to a certain degree when we played it in the 90s. And I think that's, what you would do. I mean, imagine playing a Coltrane tune exactly how he played it. That's ridiculous.
I also find them interesting for an analytical purposes.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
look at it and you go, "Oh, well, this is what they were thinking," or it somehow becomes more transparent.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
And we were both Gabriel and I, and we have like three proofreaders with us now. We were pretty shocked when we got to the discipline record, actually the beat record, to see what Tony was doing. There was a lot more going on in the upper end of the stick than we thought. And I didn't tell you this, but Gabriel did all this by ear. And I would argue with him sometimes, like, it sure doesn't sound like Tony's playing a fourth here. He's like, no, it's a fourth. I was like, are you sure? Or it's a fifth. And I'm like, but the fourth. And he's like, well, it's called Tony. Yep, he's right. So Gabriel's ear is ridiculous, even to the degree of like when he was transcribing some of the guitar synth solos from the Discipline era, he was putting in like false trigger notes. Like the low string would come out. And I was like, I don't think that's in the solo. He's like, it's in there. I was like, well, I don't think it belongs. I think it's a false trigger note.
yeah, yeah, that
Yeah.
is interesting. Um, I had heard tell from Anthony Garone over at Make Weird Music that there would talk about Lark's Tongue's book.
Yeah, we're gonna do the whole Wet-NER as the next
Well, do you
that
need
thing.
anybody for the Jamie Muir parts? Because I'll
Yeah, absolutely. You want to help out? Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, our plan is to do the Wetton records, and then we have the double. Then we have the four piece, and maybe the first record. I don't know, but we're it's a long ongoing thing, and we've been very fortunate that people want it, but it's complicated financing it and making sure I've got enough money to make the next one, and because it's quite expensive to do it, and it takes years.
Pictures.
I'm kind of in charge of the tabs. Oh my God, it's really tough. It's really tough. That's why we got proofreaders, and we were really in intense discussions about how Robert was fingering things, and thankfully our proofreaders are more thorough than me. I just look at it like, well, here, this works, but they're like, no, you got to see this one video at a minute 16. If you look over in the right corner, his finger's down there, and I think it's an open string. I was like, okay, guys, you win.
But there's detail to that.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
interesting timbre wise when things are voiced a certain way. And
Yeah, and if you're gonna transcribe it, you might as well get it. You want to get it right. You want to get it right. And the trick is, or the quirk of this thing is, you want to get it how those guys played it. Of course, like Adrian's solos, you just have to find the best fingering. But the parts, you want it the way they played it. And then if you want to play it differently, that's great. But at least we've got a library level documentation.
talk to me for a minute about John Wetton as a bass player.
Okay, so I never heard Crimson before Discipline.
Oh, okay.
When I was 13, I heard at a friend's house his brother playing the first half of the first record. And I never heard Crimson again until Discipline. So my context of John Wetton actually is more UK and then Asia, and then I kind of had to go back and find the Crimson. Even I never really even went back until I was working with Robert, and some of it I never even heard until they were like, "We want to do this old tune." I was like, "Okay, well, I'll go look at this old tune." Yeah, I mean, John's sound is amazing, and the most amazing thing about him is that he's singing at the same time. That recently I revisited that performance of Easy Money, all on the Midnight Special, because I was going back through Midnight Special. That performance is ridiculous.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, yeah,
I've seen it. It takes you aback. I think that this
yeah,
one's up on
yeah,
network television. Well, Crimson was subversive.
yeah,
If there were
yeah,
nothing else, I just think subversive to, subverting the blues scale.
yeah, yeah,
Just start there.
yeah.
All right. Yeah, this is this blues scale. Okay, good luck.
Mhm, mhm.
Like what's the opening track on Construction of Light? Oh, Prozac Blues.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know. Yeah, that's a blues.
Again, there's a few little quirky things in there that are like little minefields that you've got to be so careful playing it live. Because everybody's in unison,
Hmm.
you know.
I
So,
love it's funny because that's really where we connected was at that moment of Construction of Light, but there's so many moments on that record that fascinate me, and one in particular is that the intro of Frying Pan is different from the outro of Frying Pan
right.
in a very, very interesting and dramatic way.
Hmm, hmm.
And that's the kind of thing where you say, that's that's music composition, you know.
And you know what's so strange about that, and I still wrestle with this all the time with myself and with my coaching clients or whatever, is you would never do that in a film. You never see the same scene twice, ever. Unless it's like a montage of earlier in the film, which is it's kind of lame.
Right.
But in music, maybe because it's repetitively based, but it doesn't have to be. It's just a choice that our culture's embraced. But you take it to film or literature, you don't do the same scene twice.
No.
Think about that for a second when you're working on the next piece of music. It makes it a lot more work.
And I had a composition professor who at the beginning of my trying to write chamber music said, "No, you can't have a literal repeat there."
Right. And you know what my first composition teacher said to me? He gave me this little exercise of like, do 16 bars, phrases. Make four phrases, 16 bars. And I did a little melody and a little chorus, and he's like, that's a minor seventh chord. We don't do that. Even though the thing was kind of abstract, I was like, oh, we don't do that, do we? Okay. Well,
I had another one. The vanilla octave.
oh, I like that. Well, you know what I ended up doing with my composition work, and this kind of takes us back to the beginning here.
Yeah.
I decided I wanted to learn from these guys regardless. So I wanted to go down that path. But what I did was I had a little journal of all the biases that they were putting on me. We don't do that. And another one was, if you've got a bunch of eighth notes, you don't just throw a triplet in the melody. And I actually, when I go back and look at some of them, I can see maybe things stuck out funny.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want.
Or movement that can stick out funny. So, parallel, you might avoid.
But still, when you're a young musician and you hear that, you're like, you either accept it for no good reason, because it doesn't, you made the other choice. So you're just taking on somebody else's thing, or you do it because, well, I've lost the thread of my thought of what the other one was, but you just have to. I felt like I needed to be really careful with that, because you don't want to end up with just a bunch of, your musical life is a bunch of other people's biases. That's fucked up.
Right.
And that's not teaching you how to do anything except feed the teacher back what they want to hear.
And I guess that sort of even goes back to the orchestration thing in the six piece, where you have to have reasons for the choices you make in the piece. I feel I guess that was drilled into me by these professors. You have to defend every note.
Right. Right.
There's that moment where Varese says to Chow Un Sung, "Is that a note or a piece of dirt?"
That's awesome. Well, you could also have intuitive reasons, but that's harder to defend. I think Robert's defense would be, that's what I played.
No, I played it, therefore it is fine. Yeah, look, writing it all down or totally improvising it, it's still shaping sounds, right? And I'm kind of interested in how you transitioned through your different playing styles with the war, with the stick, and then I noticed that you play now flat with the instrument like it's a keyboard in front of you.
Yes. No, this is such a great conversation. I don't want to stop.
Okay.
So let's do another session.
Okay.
And that'll be awesome.
We'll put it all together.
Great to see you.
Great to see you, Trey. Thank you for
All
doing
right,
it.
let's see what I got. Cheers.
Bye.